Okay, just real quick, because I'm finding there's a lot of questions and stuff that are being brought up that we answered in prior meetings or could be looked up in the minutes. So the one thing I think will be important was a couple weeks ago, and I'll use the correct word this time, formal discussions like actually last time, well not last meeting, but the meeting before, Dr. Littlefeld actually described the high schools he talked to and what the parameters of the conversations were, being Pinkerton, Bow, I think Goffstown, and Pembroke. So could you just repeat that so folks here have the story directly from you that you spoke about a couple meetings ago? I think that would help a lot and eliminate a lot of questions.
Yeah, and refresh my memory if I leave someone out. Pinkerton, we've had some initial discussions with, and actually done a tour of the campus. Londonderry, we've had some discussions with, and you're quite correct. Pinkerton appears, I think David mentioned this, at this point in time to be the only district out there that has the capacity to accept all our youngsters. So the other districts that I've talked to could take a portion of that. So Londonderry I've talked to, had a nice tour last week of Goffstown High School. Feeler out to Bedford without any follow-up conversation. Bow, actually met with the superintendent from Bow last week. They have the Dunbarton possibility, but they're certainly keeping their options open. And then we've sent out, David, you can help me a little bit with this, we've sent out to some additional school districts requests for information, the high school assessment committee is, requests for information and the ability to take a tour of those high schools. Concord, I know, is on the list. Pembroke Academy is on the list.
Yes, I think that's the extent of the list, and as of today, I think we've received about 5 responses for people that are willing to have us come down and take a look, so it's encouraging.
One other thing, you had like some particulars, again, I know you represent 3 districts. Could you talk a little bit about the ARPA contract and how that's structured with Pinkerton? You had spoke a little bit about the percentage of kids that were worked in the contract that could go to other schools, similar to the JCB and some other parameters when you spoke to them.
Well, the Auburn contract, which the gentleman to my right was intimately involved in as well, there's nothing unique about that contract to Auburn. It's strikingly similar to the contract that Chester, Derry, and Hampstead have with Pinkerton. It does allow for 5% of our students to go somewhere else with no questions asked. We don't have to account for them. I just remind you that the contract that Auburn entered into with Pinkerton and the pullout was done at one of those 5-year windows. The Auburn community had expressed the desire to look at Pinkerton. There had been a relationship with Pinkerton in the past. And so the community was interested in rekindling that. We had an opportunity to pull out in 2013 and therefore made notification to Manchester by June 30th, 2011 that we were pulling out. So we did follow the Manchester contract for that pullout. All freshmen from Auburn are currently attending Pinkerton a year early, and the Auburn School District did negotiate the impact of that and pay for it. with Manchester. So, I mean, that's really something I think David has said, and his presentation shows it. Some of these alternatives do carry a price tag with them. And if that capital cost is in the $800,000 to $900,000 range, and you have to pay 3 or 4 or 5 years of that, plus other damages, you might be talking about millions. And I think that, I can't speak for the board, but I think the board would need to have some sort of a community mandate that the investment of millions of dollars to get out of the contract is something this community would be interested in doing. Bedford, I believe, was interested, and I believe that Bedford paid $10 million to get out of the contract. It's a lot of money and had a significant impact on Bedford's tax rate. It continues to have that impact. That's basically it.
Representation, I was going to say, can you talk to that? John actually addressed the representation on their, not their school committee, but whatever you want to call it, their board of trustees.
The board of trustees, if you're a member district, you would have 2 seats on the board of trustees, and those seats are filled by the other board of trustees appointing those people. So there aren't elections, and there aren't, it's not a school board. The board of trustees is quite different than a school committee or a school board. But you do have that representation.
I just wanted to point out one thing, Phil, that I didn't have time to do it before the presentation, but I do have every intention of looking at what the tax impact would be, where we usually quote like a $200,000 house per year, what the impact would be. But I didn't have time to get that done before this meeting. But I think that really when we're talking about $8 million or $10 million, it's just an abstract number. We really need to understand how does it affect people's budgets and for how long, and how we're going to deal with that. And that it's a little bit more complicated, but I intend to kind of go down that road and figure that out.
Excuse me, 14 Golden Gate Drive. I wanted to kind of just mention more so for the community that whatever we do has to be voted on by the community. It has to be put on a ballot by a deadline of early to mid-January to make it onto the next ballot for the town vote. If we miss that deadline, it has to go to a special election, which there is an expense involved in doing that. So I just didn't know if people were aware of that. I wanted to, that kind of puts the rush on things, in my opinion, to move it along. Also, if we are looking at a plan B, if Manchester is not found in breach, and we are looking to vote to say, yeah, I'll pay $10 million to get my kids out of there, does that have to go on the ballot for the town to vote on? Is that something that we don't have to wait? Can we start the process of getting that on a ballot to get a town vote on? What is the plan B? That's my question.
I'll comment on that.
I was just going to purely speculating, and if there was a determination of a breach and the state went along with it, and again, Gordon, you can give me one in the ribs if you like, but there could be, as I understand it, a special election. Well, there could also be no contract. Is that correct? We could send our students somewhere without a contract. And again, that's speculation on my part.
I think you're, and it's important to understand that, that there are a couple of factors here, and there's been a lot of discussion about hurrying up the process of a declaration of breach. And a formal declaration with this. And the requirement of the contract is a notice 180 days before a termination would occur, and a termination date being specified in the notice of breach. That's what the contract calls for. The purpose of that is to give the breaching party 180 days in which to cure that breach by some action. 180 days from today is past the annual school district meeting. You're not going to, if Manchester, unless Manchester were to say, yeah, we agree, we're a breach, and we'll let you out of the agreement. If they contested the breach, the decision about whether or not there was in fact a breach would be litigated before the State Board of Education. Currently, the State Board of Education approves Manchester high schools as schools for the acceptance of students, and cites that they are approved schools by the New England Association of Secondary Schools and Colleges. So that is a fact that you need to consider. The State Board of Education will make that decision, and then if there was a dispute regarding the State Board of Education's decision concerning whether or not there was a breach, that could be appealed to the Supreme Court of the state of New Hampshire. So there is a process to follow concerning it. Now, in terms of your specific question about, help me again, Dana,
If indeed there was a breach, the state agreed,
yeah,
and there was no time, or for whatever reason there was no election to determine a new contract,
well, in order to hold,
students could go to other schools without a contract, correct? We could send them to other schools. We would not have a contract with anyone at that point.
well, if the district did not have a contract with anybody, the district would be responsible for sending students to any school that a student got into and paying the full freight for that student to go to that school, and it would not be required to provide transportation for those students. That would be the legal requirements. Under RSA 194.27a, the school district is responsible for educating all students at any school that they are allowed to, that they would get into. If the district had a contract with any school, the district could then assign students to attend that school. I still think, though, that you were, the point you were asking is the timing of having a special meeting to consider an alternative after a decision concerning breach had been reached by, assuming it was litigated by either the State Department or ultimately by the Supreme Court. If it went to the Supreme Court, it would likely take a year or two to get that far, at least, and the litigation would continue for a period of time. But once the final decision was made, then at that point in time, if it was not within the window of time to get something on an immediate ballot for a March meeting, the district could petition the Superior Court for permission to hold a special school district meeting because of an emergency having arisen, and request the authority to, if an appropriation was necessary. If it was simply a requirement for approval from voters for a tuition agreement that did not necessitate an additional expenditure of money, that didn't require an appropriation, you could have a meeting without petitioning the Superior Court. But if it requires an appropriation, which entering a long-term tuition agreement would be an appropriation, then it would require permission from the Superior Court for the permission to hold that special school district meeting, and once that was received, you could have a special meeting.
Thank you.
Patricia?
However, that was not Mrs. Salvis's question. That was great information. Mrs. Salvis's question is, can we put a warrant article on our March school board elections to say Hooksett is willing to pay $10 million, Manchester, we're all set? That's the question that Kara Salvis asked. Can we do that?
You can can certainly do that if you deem that advisable.
Who deems it advisable?
The school board. Or by petition.
And I guess at the last meeting, I didn't understand why we can't structure these things simultaneously. I feel like we're working in a vacuum. We don't even, I mean, they opened up to, Manchester wanted us to come in and have a meeting. And I thought that that was really important. So we knew where their heads are at. What are they thinking? You know, I heard Brennan say that possible to modify the contract. Of course, to me, I know that they were thinking about moving students to West. But I take that as the doors open, let's discuss other options with them and be able to come back and have some real answers. And I wanted to see that happen simultaneously with this forum. And I want to see that happen simultaneously with sending the letter of breach. Because there's nothing to say if we send that letter and we start to have some actions that are good actions, we can rescind that, I would assume. There's no reason to proceed. I would really like to see us move forward simultaneously on all three of these actions as a board. And I think that that's how we're going to best serve our community, because we will have more information, especially if we sit down and have that meeting with them, because we don't know where they're at with this. I feel like we're having these discussions and we don't know if they're going to hold us responsible for the $8 million. We don't know if they're going to hold us responsible if we start sending all of our students to another school. I really feel that we need to do all three of these things simultaneously, and we need to do them now.
If I could, for clarification, Tricia, then, of course, we voted as a board that after this forum, we would have that meeting with Manchester, so that will happen. What we will need to do is, Cheryl, for that to happen, of course, is to take action on the letter, just for clarification, so everyone knows where we're at in the process. Tricia?
I would also say, I agree that we need to be working on more than one front, but how serious do we show Manchester we are, that we feel they're in breach and they're not providing a quality education for our students. I've said this for 5 years. I was very involved in a high school study committee, the Citizens for a High School Study. We really can't afford that. It's sad, but we can't. It's $50 to $65 million for a high school. We give our children K to 8, the Cadillac of education, and then we send them in a Pinto to Manchester. Dr. Brennan, we're doing the best we can. It's no longer good enough for Hudson. So I think we need to have a warrant article on our ballot that says we're willing to figure out how to come up with $10 million to get out of Manchester while we're notifying we're on breach and we're talking to anybody. If Pinkerton can't take us all and 5 places can take us, then we've got to be talking on all the fronts, because these poor kids in 8th grade, they're on hold. That's a horrible place to be.
I just wanted to clarify, because I did give the presentation, and Attorney Graham has supplied me information about this as well. There isn't a guaranteed $8 or $10 million, and he was very clear about that it's a negotiation process. So I just don't want to put forth an exact price that would get us out of all of our obligations. I tried to press for some type of a number so that we could kind of wrap our hands around it and understand what we're talking about. And I do have one question for Attorney Graham, if maybe he could think about this one. If we said that we wanted to leave the contract, does it forgo us from trying to litigate breach? So could we inform them that we want to leave, and we're, the community supports paying whatever it takes if it says we lose, but could we still pursue our case for breach? Or we're not giving up that right to claim a breach because we've said we're done?
No, you can you can definitely pursue both provision, both things at the same time, simultaneously.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we've got a new, thank you.
Cheryl Puritan, Happy Halifax said, as members of this so-called community I keep hearing about, my husband and I unequivocally support the continuation of the contract with Manchester. We find that our kids are receiving a more than inadequate education, the classroom sizes have been reduced. My daughter's Latin 4 class only has 4 students, so I guess it all just depends on what classes you take. I'm not worried about my son, who's a freshman, continuing at Central. I wouldn't hesitate to move to a community to accommodate his educational needs if I thought that's what it took. My daughter's a senior, is all set, but we're happy. They're thriving socially, academically, extracurricular activities. You can get a lot of things at Central that you're not going to get even at Pinkerton. Crew, for one thing, a very active Key Club at Central. There's just so many more opportunities. And from where I live in Hooksett, to drive to have my kid on the bus to Pinkerton, it's totally unreasonable. It's double the mileage one way. I mean, 9 miles to Central, 18 to Pinkerton. It makes no sense. Thank you.
Dave Lebeck, 29 Morrill Road. I caution putting $10 million on the ballot or any number. The majority of the people in the crowd here have kids in the school. But we know in this community, it does not vote that way. So there's a whole lot of people not sitting here that will vote just because they see the number. So I guess as a community, my kids are done high school after this year. I have nothing to gain from this. Matter of fact, keep it status quo because I'm going to save maybe money in my pocket. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's fair. But there's a lot of people in this community that does not vote or think the way all these parents are in the room. And we keep missing that opportunity to educate the people in this town about our children and needs and wants because they don't want to pay more. They don't blame them. I don't want to pay more. But there's a cost for something, and I just caution the board with numbers because the public will not support it, and we can't approach it that way. Because without the public, without the whole community, we got nothing.
If I could, I appreciate your caution, and yeah, that was a number. The board has not discussed anything like that. So just for the record, yeah, that was a number. But I appreciate your caution. Please.
Chris Edina, Gardens-Home Drive. I have 2 little girls, and they're quite a ways from high school, but I'm incredibly concerned about where they're going to be going to high school. And I don't know everything about every high school around. But a big question I have is, I know you spoke with the Manchester School District, but is there a consensus of, are they all out wanting Hooksett to be there? Or do they care one way or the other? Do we know that? I mean, they might be just as happy to lower their number of kids in the school. I know it's less funding. But as you were saying, it's a good idea to have these conversations with them and see if we can come to some sort of compromise instead of just waging war one way or the other. We might be able to get out of it for less money and not burning any bridges. I don't know, but that doesn't seem to be discussed at all. It's just kind of, no one knows anything. We're waging wars.
Again, just to clarify, the board had taken action to have this forum first, but the administration will be speaking with Manchester about setting up a joint meeting.
Good evening, Mark Meagle. I want to, I guess, echo Let's comments here. We're talking big numbers here, and I would think that warrant article would need to have that number on it. I'm on the budget committee in town, and I want to reiterate what he was just saying here. Now, the voters this past May turned down and voted for a default budget, which was lower than the proposed budget. it was an increase of only $327,000 that the town was proposing for additional funds. And the town voted down the $327,000 additional money. We're talking $10 million here. So I caution everybody, I know it's emotional here, but that's a lot of money, and the history of it is that the majority of the voters, granted it was only, what, 600 and something voters, I think, at that point, or 2,000 or something like that, but they turned down, they voted for a default budget, and that's the default budget, I believe, for the last 2 years. The voters also at the school district election in March approved a budget that was $1 million less than what the school district voted on. And the town voted to approve that $1 million deficit. Just want to clarify and put a perspective on all these numbers. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, a comment on that?
Please.
I think Mr. Naito makes a good point, and this is one of the reasons that I want to act cautiously, because regardless of how we feel and how you feel as parents, this has to go to the ballot. And if it fails at the ballot, we're right where we are. So we really need to kind of think this out and make the right choices, because as Mr. Lebec pointed out, there are a lot of people in this town that don't have kids in school, and taxes are a big burden. So we need to kind of weigh all of these things. So we do want to take action. The other thing I think we need to think about is we are really considering a fundamental change in this town. I don't know how long it's been since all of our kids have been going to Manchester. I only moved here 12 years ago, but I know it's been going on virtually forever. So it's a real big shift that we're talking about. For some of us maybe that have younger kids, and we're not really aware of that long standing, but it's a huge step, and that may have some resistance in of itself without the money. So a lot of things to be considered.
Even though it's a huge shift, their best is no longer good enough. And it is every person's job in this room to educate their neighbors of what is going on in Manchester, and not relying on the union leader or the Hooksett Banner or someone else to go to their neighbor who's got children outside of the school and explain to them what is going on. Just because I personally am an alumni of Central High School, thought that's why I was moving to Hooksett, was because I wanted my kids to go to Central. But it is not the Central it used to be, not even 5 years ago. It's a whole different world in Manchester, and their priority and if you ask a Manchester school teacher, what is your vision for education? What is your vision for where you want your kids to be? They don't have a vision, because they don't have a visionary on their board of mayor and alderman, and their school board chairman is the mayor. There's no vision. They don't know where they're going, so how are they going to get our kids where they need to be? If they don't know where they're going, how are these kids going to know when they're there? Like, we need, and I've said this, I have someone smiling at me in the audience at the soccer field. I said, go walk around your neighborhood and find out who doesn't have kids that are K-8 or 11, 12, 13, and 14, and talk to them about what it is. We're all excited, we want to act, we want to move, but we have a whole community that needs to know how bad this really is. How our kids feel in 8th grade, not knowing, are they in breach, are they not in breach? Am I going to Central, am I going to West? Where am I going? Or even younger kids, like 6th graders who have 8th graders, are they gonna figure this out by the time I get there? We really need to motivate this community and inspire them that this is important. It happens every 2 to 3 years, you're absolutely right. But $10 million this year, what is it next year? And what is it the year after? We have a superintendent who works in a K-8 district who's spending more and more of his time on high school. He needs to be spending it on changing from GLEs to Common Core Standard. It's a total different way to think about education. And what is Manchester doing about that? Are they preparing for the future? They're not. And I'm not, I have a sister who's an educator. I talk about things like GLEs and Common Core Standards, and she's like, are your teachers talking about that? And I'm like, absolutely. She goes, we're not.
Good evening, David Stanton, 34 Benton Road. First, I'd like to echo the comments by Mr. Liskars earlier. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure some of this is a little rough to take in, but this obviously is a very, very important topic. I don't know if it's within my right, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. How many of you have kids in K through 8 currently? If you don't want to answer, I understand. Okay. I am a third grader. I've lived in Hooksett for 10 years. You know, there's been a funny word that's been said numerous times tonight, and that's the word community. I have found it increasingly harder and harder to call this a community over, especially the last several years. Now, I could run down the laundry list, but it's pretty prevalent within the media. Every couple months, it seems like Hooksett is getting its name smattered across the media for one reason or another. Let's face it, start with the police department. Now, for you two ladies who said you do have kids in K through 8, I can't imagine having a kid in 8th grade looking and just hearing some of the stuff that has been brought up over and over the last several months, like the fear that must instill in them. Now, I'm sure it's not all 100% to the letter. With respect to the people who are here or have kids in the high schools and that are pleased with what's happened and would like their siblings to go on and follow in their footsteps, I think that's within their right. But as a parent of a third grader, I will not settle for mediocrity for my son. Absolutely not. He's an only child. I grew up with siblings. I want nothing but the best for my child. Now, if it means that we stand still for another 2 years, then you're going to see a for sale sign out my front lawn, and I'll be moving to a community where we have pride in our children, pride in a high school. There's nothing that brings a community together more than that situation. Our kids should not have to be put through this. I'm sure everybody's looking at it for their best interests. At least I hope so, because it's going to be sad to walk away from some of the friendships and the people that I know here tonight in 2 years when I have to put that for sale sign out front, because I'm not going to stand for it. It's ridiculous. Let's get the ball rolling, get it done. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, a comment on that? I just wanted to answer. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't know you were done talking. I have a 7th grader. I have a junior, and I have a graduate of West. I have a junior in Pembroke. I opted out, and I wanted full disclosure that I did make a personal choice to opt my child out of the Manchester School District, and I plan to do it with my 7-year-old, my 7th grader. But I don't want to bring my personal decisions here to vote. That's why I want to hear from the community. But those are decisions that I made, and I just didn't want to mislead you that I didn't have a child.
No, I apologize. One other thing I wanted to say is I find it hard to believe that somebody couldn't look into their crystal ball to see class sizes as to it getting to this point. So if they've already missed it over this length of time, again, how many times is it going to be missed again? Like, from what I understand, the 2nd and 3rd grade classes are very big in comparison to the upper classes. So more problems down the road, and it can't go on a year by year. Let's fix it. Let's put a Band-Aid on it. Thank you.
I'd just like to say that having been just elected this spring, I've learned a lot. And just from what Mr. Levesque said about the 3 study halls, hadn't considered that before his public input. So when you look at this on the surface, it seems pretty clear cut. You start talking to our attorney and you look at the legal aspects and you look at all these aspects, and it is a complicated issue. Even though as parents, we feel very strongly about it. Up here, we have to look at all these different things. And sometimes the numbers are not really what they seem, but they may be legal. And that's what I'm trying to deal with right now. Thank you.
Thinking strategy. So you've heard, I think, pretty loud and clear that everybody here at least wants out. So what sort of strategy? It wasn't clear to me from the first question that was posed tonight, which was, when is the date? Why isn't the letter sent? So when is that date coming when you get the numbers so you can send the letter with the 180-day warning that they're in breach?
I think Dave mentioned earlier, there is a letter that's been reviewed, but there's some information we're still waiting for. And that information is, as I understand it, either close to being, I don't know, I don't have a time frame.
So
I can
are
tell
you
you.
asking them, you're calling them on a regular
Absolutely.
basis and being a thorn in their side, like I'm being tonight?
Yeah.
To say, where are they?
I don't mean to sound like I'm skirting it, but a lot of it's information that could potentially be part of a negotiation. So I don't want to say too much, but I can tell you that we are waiting for some information. Once that information is received, we have, as a board, we'll sit down and say, okay, what are we doing?
Is there any way to compel that number from them so we can, again, time keeps on going here, and time is up. When I listen to a lawyer, this is going to take a lot longer than any of us want.
I'm going to guess we'd have that information this week.
I'd just like to say, Mark, that if I don't have that information tonight, I plan on filing a right to know, because I think that's discoverable under 91A, and they'd be compelled within 5 days to produce it to any citizen that would like to file a right to know. And I think that it's unfortunate that with our partner, we have to do that, but the law does give us that ability.
I know we don't like to say that, I think last meeting, we don't want to call them liars, but when they're hiding kids in study halls and they're not telling us the numbers and hiding in lunch classes, we can't trust our partner. So they're clearly not our partners. We need to become a little bit aggressive with the way we pursue them. So thank you.
John Carrington, Hackett Hill. I'd like to correct the previous speaker. He said everybody here wants out.